Hello out there, my name is Christina. Welcome back to my channel. This is the place where we gush about the films that we love and try understanding the ones that we don't. On today's agenda is the 1973 Japanese adult animated film entitled Belladonna of Sadness. It was directed by Eiichi Yamamoto and written by Yoshiyuki Fukada. In it, newlyweds Jean and Jean take residency in a rural village in medieval France. On their wedding night, Jean is brutally violated by the local baron and his courtiers. In order to take revenge, she makes a pact with the devil, who appears as an erotic sprite, and thus turns her into a black-robed vision of madness and desire. In order to appease YouTube's need to censor just about everything, every time I refer to the catalyst of Belladonna of Sadness, I will use the word violation or some derivative of that. I do think it's important that viewers know that most, if not all, of the imagery in Belladonna of Sadness consists of very intense, albeit abstract iterations of this event that can be potentially triggering. This analysis will also differ slightly from the ones I've done in the past, in that it will be more prioritized with context over content, and I'm hoping the reason for that will eventually speak for itself. Nonetheless, I will handle this subject matter with the utmost sincerity and care that I possibly can, starting with the source material. Here we go.
Okay, so this is French writer Jules Michelet. Belladonna of Sadness is one of many stories in his novel entitled Satanism and Witchcraft from 1862, but this only scratches the surface in terms of what he published over the course of his lifetime. He is best known for his multi-volume work, History of France, that was released in 1833 and effectively traces the history of France from the earliest times to the French Revolution. Besides what might be the obvious, he put this collection together with the secondary goal of celebrating an anticipated Renaissance, and with that, he felt pretty comfortable criticizing monarch-based divisions of power. This came with suggestions that political faculty should be entrusted to those being governed to some extent, and a staunch refusal on his part to praise any empire through the use of oaths or other binding materials. His writings, often prioritized with the theme of justice, extended beyond the status quo, which included, but certainly was not limited to, accounts of abuse women were subjected to in either theory or known actuality. The best, most informing, and most relevant illustration of this in Belladonna of Sadness being our first interaction with Jean as viewers, whose introduction is paired with a violation that is more than just commonplace. Right of the Lord, or right of the first night, were supposed legal rights in medieval Europe, called such because they allowed feudal lords to have physical relations with any woman without consent being taken into consideration, particularly on their wedding night. While there are many references to this custom throughout the centuries, scholars since the 1800s have questioned whether such a law ever truly existed or was practiced, with many believing it was simply a trope used to make rulers seem more barbaric. Furthermore, this name may have been based on observations made about authority figures that use their power and influence to exploit women with impunity, as opposed to a legitimate legal right, and this is evidenced by the fact that it was seemingly enforced inconsistently and with discretion.
Now, becoming further acquainted with Jean does necessitate some descent into an intoxicating barrage of madness, but sympathy goes a very long way in interpreting the logic behind her actions. Belladonna, which is a phrase that's interchangeable with beautiful woman, does suggest some sense of toxicity in the male gaze, which is the point of view that would determine Jean's worth and sense of agency in this particular narrative. As mentioned previously, Michelet's Satanism and Witchcraft reimagines witchcraft as an act of rebellion against feudalism, and not only that, but one that would have been especially attractive to women given their status and capabilities at the time it was written. Belladonna of Sadness pays due respect to the repercussions of Jean's supposed dabbling with witchcraft. But one could also take issue with its clutch references to historical figures, namely that of Marion, who is the main figure in a painting called Liberty Leading the People from 1830 that is shown just as the credits are starting to scroll. These references can be framed as overzealousness or desperation for an inspired audience with further contextualization. These figures were not marginalized simply because they were women, or even simply because they practiced witchcraft, but rather because they represented a larger group of people that wanted France to be independent from England, and this required overthrowing rulers deemed to be unfit or radical. I guess my point here is that Jean's eventual pattern of insubordination would have had serious consequences had they been carried out by someone else. And this is without taking into consideration her sexual exploits or her eventual surrendering to Satan. And this is where Belladonna of Sadness gets a little further away from being a substantiated blend of plight and conflict. Of course, I'm not here to just mindlessly rag on a movie. Some of what has been called audaciousness can be attributed to the state of the company that was responsible for Belladonna of Sadness's production, Mushi Production. Advertised as the conclusion of a trilogy of X-rated animated films, Yamamoto conceptualized this excerpt from Satanism and Witchcraft as a sort of Hail Mary in preparation for Mushi Production to go bankrupt, which it did a short while after Belladonna of Sadness was released. Made with a very small budget, a lot of Belladonna of Sadness is static, so to call it an animated film at times is actually pretty generous, bearing in mind the overarching impact of manga movies and what can be insinuated from still images in a given narrative. Speaking of which, artist and designer Kumi Fukai brings to this production a style that is both decadent and fragile, and has a very nightmarish appreciation for Jean's circumstances that is far from interested in subtlety. Not to mention, fully invested in the force that is superstition. If nothing else, nobody can fault Belladonna of Sadness for its ambitions, though some of what it intends to offer on the topic of empowerment gets lost on a psychedelic runway. It also doesn't help that, to my dismay, I haven't been able to find anything in the form of interviews or literature that really ties either Yamamoto or Fukada to the source material I mentioned earlier or the subject matter. Nonetheless, what does get captured is the often contradictory nature of suppression, and this comes to fruition in a final measure meant to extinguish Jean's influence that only works to inspire her community further. This is acutely reminiscent of the way that women have navigated sociological structures of power in the past and paved the way for others, well-behaved or not. The source of this beautiful woman's power can be written off as a misnomer or maybe even a cliche, but it does pose the very important question of what came first, the afflicted witch or the way they've been dealt with historically. If you are still watching, thank you so much for your time. As usual, questions, comments, and concerns are encouraged and welcome below, in addition to suggestions as to what movies I should be watching and analyzing next. My name is Christina, and I'll see you next time. Happy film hunting. Bye.